Art Gruenberger is the founder of the Puppet Art Theater Company, a puppet company that makes six figures performing over 600 shows a year. Stay tuned because I'm going to ask Art how he does it on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Under the Puppet is made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons. To support the show and hear new episodes before anyone else, become a patron. Visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media for more information. And thank you for your support. Welcome to the show that talks to puppeteers about the art and business of puppetry. My name is Grandpa Choco, and this is Under the Puppet. Welcome to Under the Puppet. My guest this episode is the founder of the Puppet Art Theater Company, Art Gruenberger. In this interview, I talk to Art about how he came to the world of puppetry and pick his mind a bit about the business side of the art form and how he's managed to build an incredibly successful puppetry business in the Puppet Art Theater Company. This is one you'll probably want to take some notes on. Here now is my interview with Art Gruenberger. Art Gruenberger, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thanks. Great to be here.
I'm so happy to have you on the show. We talk about, I always say that this show is about the art and business of puppetry. And there have been several requests to have you on to talk about the business of puppetry. So we're going to get to that. But, and I know that, because I read your bio online, that puppets kind of came to you a little bit later, like in your college life. But do you remember your first exposure to puppetry?
Absolutely. It was Sesame Street. And in fact, I think my very first puppet was one of the old latex Ernie puppets. Mm-hmm. I had one of those, and I had a Cookie Monster puppet. And what was disturbing to me about Cookie Monster on Sesame Street is you could tell that he wasn't really eating the stuff, that he was just sort of like dissolving it and sort of spitting it all over the place. So right. I took a little knife and I opened up my Cookie Monster's mouth so he could actually swallow things. Yeah.
Doing puppet building right from the start.
Exactly. Or at least puppet altering.
Right. Were you into performing as a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in fifth grade, one of the fifth grade teachers came into the class and pulled me out and put me in the Magic Flute. We were doing the Magic Flute in fifth grade. It was not a good production of the Magic Flute, but it was the Magic Flute. And that's when I fell in love with being on stage. And from that time forward, I was in every play and production and Christmas pageant that was going on.
And were your parents creative at all?
Not in a way that they were making a living at it or in a way that they were musicians, but my mom was. My mom played a lot with us, and she was always ready to engage in sort of imagination games, and so I think that really fed a lot into it. My dad less so. He played a bit, but it was more my mom that I think was a real creative influence for me, and just in real subtle ways as a kid.
Yeah, and they were supportive of you pursuing these, like being in the plays and pageants and all that stuff?
They were. The best way that they were supportive of me is they didn't force me into any particular path other than they wanted me to get a college degree, and that's all they wanted. They didn't care what the degree was in. They didn't care what I did with it. They just wanted me to get a college degree, and so there was never like go get a state job or get something stable or anything like that from them, which I think was really helpful too.
Yeah. And you said you were in plays and stuff. Did that continue all the way through high school and stuff?
All the way through high school, yeah.
And then when you went to college, were you looking at a degree in performing?
Not at all. In fact, I just never assumed I could make a living at performing. But I went into school and I had no idea what I wanted to do. But a bunch of people said, "Oh, you'd be a great teacher." So I thought, all right, well, I don't know what I want to do. So I went to school to become an elementary school teacher. And my last semester of college, I took a puppetry course from a guy named Richard Bay, and that changed the trajectory of my life.
What was it about that class that captivated you and made you want to do puppets?
It was, well, first I was just trying to get an A in the class, so I was just trying to, kind of snow the instructor, right? But he said that I had some talent, and that always, perks my ears up a little bit. And then he hired me on into his company to do some shows, and as part of my effort to get an A in his class, he was directing a play called 1,000 Cranes. And it was a story about Sadako Sasaki, and it was an adult story about basically the bombing of Hiroshima. and we performed it at the 1991 National Festival when it was in San Francisco, and it was a big, huge stage production, and the puppets were Bunraku style puppetry, and it was my first introduction to performing with puppets for an adult audience, and everyone in the audience was in tears by the end of that. And I thought, wow, how is it possible? I mean, I've always seen, sort of Muppets as puppetry, but how is it possible that you can reach an adult audience with puppetry? And that got my interest around the art form. And then the kids shows is how I started making a living through working with Richard and his company.
And his company was doing kids shows and traveling around as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Mainly in the Sacramento area. My first kids shows I got paid for was at a little theme park called the Nut Tree.
Oh yeah,
do you know the Nut Tree?
Yeah, I grew up in the Bay Area.
Oh, so yeah. So familiar, it's the place where you would stop, and there's the little train that would go around and the carousel. Yeah, so they had this big paper mache tree outside, and I was doing a story called "Who's in Rabbit's House." And I'm doing that pretty regularly, and a few other stories, in that tree puppet stage. But it was stored outside, and we would leave the puppets, in the stage, in a box. And one day when I was doing the shows there, I was running late, so I threw the sound system out of the tree, and I was setting up, and I started the music to try to get the first show on time. And I'm doing the show, and I reach down to get this big bear puppet, and as I grab it by its ear to sort of pull it up to where I can throw it on my hand, and something comes thumping out of it, and I look down, and it's this huge rat that had burrowed into this. So I've got this rat running around. I'm in sandals because it's summertime. This rat is running around on the inside of the puppet stage. I'm reaching into this puppet that had the rat in it, hoping there's not, his friend inside.
Right.
But the show continued because, of course, the show must go on.
Right. I wanted to ask, did you wind up graduating? Puppetry didn't ruin your career, right? Yeah.
No, it did. I mean, I never became a teacher, so it did spoil me for that. But I did end up graduating, and which is great.
Yeah. Did you take any performing classes while you were there, or was it strictly theater?
I ended up, by accident, with a minor in drama because I was taking so many theater classes. I took a lot, and I participated in a few of the productions there, especially the ones that were involving puppetry.
Yeah. And would you say that for an aspiring puppeteer, getting a degree is a good thing to have?
I don't know if getting a degree is a good idea for anyone to have, really. I mean, I think for me, I needed those those 4 years out of high school to sort of figure out my way and to gain a little bit of maturity, and I think that the main thing I took from college is I learned how to stand in line and how to deal with huge bureaucracies, and frankly that's really helped with a lot of the clients that I work with today. Is there's tons of paperwork and tons of bureaucracy, and that's what I learned to do in college. I didn't get a lot of great instruction as far as how to be a better performer or how to be better in rehearsals. Frankly, that came later on.
Yeah. Well, getting back to Richard Bay, who you worked with, how long did you study under him and work with him?
Boy, he had me working for him for about 2.5, 3 years. We were doing all sorts of different kids shows, and then he landed a contract with the local utility agency to do an energy conservation show. And we toured that show, maybe 3 or 4 schools a week on a real regular basis. And it was called The Secret of Smud Castle. Smud was the local Sacramento Municipal Utility District. So it was the dragon was down in the bottom of the puppet stage trying to generate all the electricity for the castle, and he was getting sick because the castle was using too much energy. And we performed that over and over and over again. It was a 2-person show. It got really boring after a while because you were just doing. So we would start just messing around where I would do the character voices for the other puppeteer as they manipulated their puppets, and they would do mine, and we'd just try to mess each other up. But what was happening during that period of working with Richard and doing that show in particular was it was building my skill set, because once we got bored with doing the actual production, we started playing and messing around, and that's always been a way that I've built my skill set, is just by having that sort of freedom to mess around.
Well, and also doing, and I think I've said this on the podcast before, but doing hundreds of shows, the same thing. That really, I mean, you learn to deal with anything. You learn to deal with the audience. You learn how to perform, and it really gives you the confidence to perform.
Yeah, and that was really surprising to me because I really didn't think doing the same show. I thought, well, I'm just going to be repeating the same stuff over and over again. So you're not. So what could I possibly learn? But I noticed I went to a workshop called. I forget what it was called, but it was a Muppet Workshop where Marty Robinson was there, and Kathy Mullins did a thing, and we spent 2 weeks with these Muppeteers, and I walked in there thinking I was super skilled just based on a year's worth of doing puppets, and it was incredibly humbling to see these guys pick up a puppet. They'd been doing it for 30 years, and they would just bring the thing to life, and I realized that I was a novice at what I was doing, but. Then a year and a half after that workshop, I'd been doing Secret of Smud Castle for a year and a half, lots and lots of shows. And I did another workshop, and I just recognized that my skills had gotten better, and I guess that's just how it works.
Now, you went to this Muppet Workshop, and every once in a while, like Henson did it a couple years ago. They had a diversity workshop, and Sesame Street every once in a while has a workshop. What advice would you give to puppeteers who are going to one of those for the first time?
Oh, don't make it into an audition to try to be a Muppeteer. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. But know that you're going to be taking a workshop with some people that are doing puppetry on a real regular basis and have some skill set in order to be in that position. And so learn what you can from them, but don't use it as an audition.
Yeah. Is there a piece of puppetry advice that, or a couple pieces from Richard that you still use today that he taught you?
There's the 5 minutes for free mantra that every time you bring up another puppet, a new puppet that the audience hasn't seen, you get 5 minutes for free. And that's essentially, it's a reminder to me because I would rush a show at the beginning of my career because I was really insecure about my shows, and I didn't have enough faith in the audience that they were going to hang with me as I was performing. So the idea that when you bring a new puppet up, you have to both let the audience get used to that puppet, let them drink it in, but because it's something new, it also gives you just a little bit more of an attention span from your audience. So 5 minutes for free. I still think of that all the time.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to hit a ton of jokes right at the top.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I love that. Now, are you going back to the Cookie Monster? And today, are you a builder as well? Do you build?
I am a builder, but I am. That's the least favorite part of my job. I really think that puppeteers come in two flavors mainly. There's puppeteers that build and then perform to to fund their building habit, and then there's puppeteers that build to as a means to an end to get to the performance, and that would be me. I would much rather be performing than building any day.
Do you build all your puppets for your shows now?
I build all of the puppets for my kids' shows mainly. I have a couple of puppeteers that will come in and help me build from time to time when we've got a lot of building to do, but I primarily do all the design and a lot of the building.
After you graduated from college and you had your degree and you're working with Richard, was puppetry your goal? Like, was this like, oh, I can make a living at this, I'm going to do it? Or were you doing other things as well?
I was waiting tables and managing the apartment complex that I was living in, and puppetry wasn't the goal, but there was the idea that, when I would do a show for Richard, I was making more than I was when I was waiting tables. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And so I thought, why don't I pursue it a little bit? And Richard was great. It's probably because I was bugging him for him to build new shows for me to go out and perform and to get more bookings for me. I was bugging him all the time about that. And he was always just encouraging me to build my own shows. And I just didn't think I could. Like, his shows were great, and his puppets, God, he's one of the most amazing builders. And his puppets are gorgeous. And I would build a puppet and it would just look, like a preschooler put it together, glue gun all over. It was a mess.
Yeah.
But he kept encouraging me, and I kept resisting. And I think the shifting point for me was when I went to the ONeill Puppetry Conference the first time, and I had a little piece there that I did called Perspectives, and it was the first little piece of puppetry that I wrote, and people were really excited about it there, and I remember calling Richard at midnight after having a really cool performance of the show, it must have been 3 a.m. here, so I'm sure he was pissed. But I called him and I said, I get it now. I think I can write my own shows. And he was like, great. Well, let me, can I go back to bed now? But that was a shift for me. And that's when I began to write my own shows.
Yeah. Being in and working in Northern California, was there any sort of thought like, I'm going to go to LA and try and get in TV and movies?
Absolutely. There was a real like, I would just love to be a Muppeteer when, early on in my career. And actually, I went down and I did an audition for Tony Urbano. And I just had no marionette experience, and so that was I just crashed and burned to that audition. But I'd done a little bit of video work in Northern California, some industrials and that sort of thing. And what I realized really early on is that I didn't like to say other people's words. And when I would get a script, I would immediately sort of start to do some rewrites on it. And, writers don't like that when you're rewriting their stuff. But that's what I discovered, is that I not only had discovered my voice, but I liked to be able to say what I wanted to say. And that's why I like performing my own shows. And that's why I think performing other people's scripts, it's just not in my wheelhouse, and it's not something that I'm particularly interested in. So I realized that doing film and television and stuff just wasn't I would love to do it, but just don't have the drive to do it. And really, once I started doing a little bit of it, it wasn't very interesting.
Right. Well, and plus you have your own thing and it's doing well for you. So why struggle to do that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seemed like the lazier choice, because it seems like if you're going to do film and television, you have to sort of be, sort of real aggressive and trying to get work. And in Northern California, we're just a bit more laid back.
Right. Yeah. Well, in 1994, you formed the Puppet Art Theater Company. What made you decide to form your own company?
Richard really, continued to encourage me to do my own work. And we were performing one of his shows at Fairy Tale Town, which is a little theme park in Sacramento. And they saw the show. I think it was A Secret of Smud Castle. And the director of the park came up to me and said, that was a really fun show. I'd like you to do a show for us for Halloween. And I said, oh, great. Well, Richard's got this wonderful show. And she said, no. I want you to build us a show. I was like, oh, okay. So I had about 4 months to build a show. So I cranked out a show, my very first show for Puppet Art Theater Company. It was Frankenswine. And it was a story, based around a clever name. It's like, oh, Frankenstein, Frankenswine. Okay, so Frankenstein with pigs. So I built this show and performed it there, and that show's still in our repertoire. It still goes out on Halloween's.
Oh, really?
New puppets, obviously, but the first set of puppets, I built these gigantic Muppet-style pigs. One of them had a blinking eye mechanism that was just really janky, and they were just horrible puppets. But the story was cute, and there was lots of audience participation, and it was really cool to have my own show in front of an audience and have the audience respond well to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that gave you the confidence of like, oh, I can do this. Like, this is no problem.
More of that confidence, for sure. Yeah, that was definitely a confidence builder.
Yeah.
I was still pretty stupid. I didn't know a lot of like how long things take to develop. And so Fairy Tale Town came back to me and said, oh, we love that show. It was a real hit. How about doing a summer series for us? I thought, okay. And they said, what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to do 4 shows over the summer. And I thought, okay, I can build 4 shows and write 4 shows and knock that out. And as we're performing one, we'll be building the other one. We'll just knock one out every 2 weeks. And we managed to do it, but thank God I was in my 20s, because I think now that would have killed me.
Yeah.
And so what they were really doing there is they were giving me an opportunity to rehearse in front of an audience, because we were doing something like, 5 days a week, 4 shows a day. And I would basically come in with a set of puppets and an outline of the show and some of the jokes. And then we would work out in front of the audience, the various bits, and mistakes would happen that are still living in the shows today. That's like, oh, that was really funny and it worked, and let's keep that in there. And things that I thought were really funny weren't funny at all. Sometimes things that are funny on paper, God, they just crash and burn.
And how long were these shows about?
They were about 25, 30 minutes
wow.
each.
So that's a good fair amount of time.
I know, right?
To try and fill.
Right. Yeah. And there was lots of filling.
Well, in your bio, I thought it was very funny. You say you're ill-equipped to run a garage sale, let alone a company. But setting up sort of the business side of things, did you have help setting up the business side of the company, or was it pretty much trial and error?
No, the very best thing I had was an accountant that gave me some advice and did my taxes. She helped me with just some of the basic bookkeeping stuff, but everything else I was reinventing from the ground up. And fortunately, there must have been just a lack of puppetry in the area that I was in, or I don't know what it was, or my price point was so low that people were just like, all right, we'll give this guy a try. But we knew that once we got into a site that they would probably have us back over and over again. And so I just didn't have a lot of business experience. I did go to Sacramento has like a small business administration organization where you can meet with other entrepreneurs. And so I set up a meeting with them. And before I did this, I worked out on paper how much I could make with puppetry. I thought, all right, well, this is what I'm charging, and this is probably what I could charge, and this is how many shows I can do a week. And I think the number was something like $36,000 a year is what I thought I could make. And sat down with this woman, and she says, okay, so, no holds barred. How much do you want to be making in 10 years? And I whipped out my paper. I said, $36,000. Here it is. And she said, no. How much do you want to be making? And I tried to explain to her my flow chart on this piece of paper and how I figured it out. And she sort of crumpled that up and threw it away and said, listen, just, use your imagination. How much? And I said, all right, $100,000. I'd love to see, the business make that much in 10 years. And then we talked about some other ways to achieve that. But the next year, the business made something like $96,000.
Wow.
And since then, it hasn't fallen below six figures, which has been really cool. And I'd love to take credit for that, but so much of the work has just sort of fallen in my lap. And I think we do a really good job. The puppeteers who work for me and myself, we do a really good job when we take out a show, and our shows are great. But so much of that has just been being at the right place in the right time and grabbing the right contract at the right time.
Well, and also being able to fulfill the contract when it drops in your lap, because something could also come to you, and then if you can't handle it, you can't handle it, and then you don't make that money. But you obviously can handle it, and
I suppose, or there's the ignorance of not realizing that I probably couldn't handle it, and then nearly
right.
killing myself to fulfill the contract. And you're like, oh, okay, and then you learn from that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
What are the benefits of starting your own company as opposed to just staying like a sole proprietor or freelancer, trying just cashing the check yourself, as opposed to officially organizing a company?
I think you can make more money in the long run if you've got your own company. It comes with a lot of headaches that maybe a puppeteer wouldn't want. And certainly, I like to perform. That's still the primary thing I like to do. But I've gotten fascinated with the business aspect of puppetry and how I can maximize the amount of money that the business is making. That's just become a really interesting challenge for me as well. And I also like the idea that my shows are out there being seen by audiences, and I'm not there, that my creative work is still kind of out there. And as a primary performer, I never thought, that would be something that's interesting to me. But it's really cool to know that, like this morning, Jack and the Beanstalk is being performed in the Silicon Valley to the German school of something out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. And so having the business means that I can, if I was just a sole proprietor doing, puppet shows by myself, okay, great. Then my income is going to be limited by the amount of shows that I can perform. But because I've got, a few performers, really talented performers that are working with me, they can be out and I can be out at the same time, and we can triple the amount of money that the business is making. I still have to pay them. I still have to, pay for vehicles and flights and all of that kind of stuff as well. But the bottom line of the business is that we're making more when our shows are out, and I can only do so many. And in fact, when I went back to grad school when I was 35, about 15 years ago, all of my work started going to my primary puppeteer, Rachel. She did just a ton of shows for me because I was busy, doing what I was doing in grad school. And the income of the business stayed the same, even though she was doing a lot of the performances. And that gave me pause. And when I left grad school, when I graduated and thought, okay, now I can get back to doing a lot of shows, I paused a little bit and I thought, you know what? Maybe I won't go back to doing a lot of shows. Maybe I can focus my time continuing to grow the business and do the shows that I want to do at the venues that I want to perform at.
Yeah. Well, on your website, it says that in 2010, you did 600 performances that year.
Yeah.
Are you still doing that number or more these days?
More these days.
Wow.
This year we're having one contract that's in renewal right now. That may slow down our year just a little bit, but yeah, we're doing at least 600 performances a year. And last year was a banner year for us. We probably got closer to 700. And it's great. We're doing lots of on our website, I think there's something like 14 or 16 kid shows that we're touring. And then we've got several contracts with larger entities like state agencies where we're doing educational performances.
Can you kind of walk us through a Cliff Notes version of the creation of a show for your company? But from, say, beginning to it hits the road and it's touring?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It varies on the show. A few of my shows have been built around a special effect. It's like, oh, this is a really cool special effect. Like we early on, I had a guitar pedal. It was like an echo effect where like it was a digital delay, and I found if I plugged a microphone into that and hit it, I could get this really cool echo effect with my voice that just sort of continued into infinity. And we thought, all right, well, that'd be really fun. So that, in combination with a strobe light, we developed a little show called Tommy's Space Adventure, where this evil scientist eventually gets zapped with the hypnotizer. And when he does, the strobe light goes off and the delay pedal goes off, and he gets, and it's cool. It's a cool effect. So that whole show is built around, that guitar delay pedal.
Yeah.
So that's sometimes how it'll go. When we're building an educational show, we'll usually work with a client and have them give us what they want the takeaway of the show to be, not necessarily what all the educational points are, but like what the primary goal of the show is. For a dental show we're touring right now, the client wanted to reduce tooth decay in children kindergarten through 6th grade. So I was like, great, it's a worthy goal. And then we had them give us like the 30 facts that will help do that. And then we had them rate it in, from 1 to 30, what is the most important and what is the least important. And we took the top 3 of those things and developed a show around those items.
Mm-hmm. What are some important things to remember when you're writing a show for, because I assume most of your shows are for families, kids and families. What's the most important thing to remember if you're writing a show for families? Or what advice could you give?
Oh, that's it. I'm not sure. I mean, there's always little bits and little things and attention spans that I think are just in the back of my mind already. But I think what's become sort of more important to me is when I'm writing a new show just for myself is what do I want to say with the show? Is there something that I want to say here, and how do I say it, and is this the appropriate audience for me to say it to? And there was I did a show called the Tale of the Dragon's Tail, and it's still touring around. But it was towards the end of the George W. Bush administration, and I was so upset with how there was sort of the bait and switch of there's weapons of mass destruction, and that's why we've gotten to go into Iraq, and then there was no weapons of mass destruction. I just thought I don't want kids to ever have to deal with an administration like that again. So is there a story I can tell? So in Tale of the Dragon's Tail, there's this evil wizard who's much like Cheney, and he convinces the king, this sort of idiot who is much like George W. Bush, he convinces the king into giving him a lot of gold and treasure to keep this so-called dragon away. And then the princess comes along and, of course, fixes the entire problem and exposes the wizard for the charlatan that he is, and everyone lives happily ever after. But so it's like something I wanted to say, and trying to figure out how to communicate that show without being, kind of a jerk about it, but just like, what's the moral here is, what's the moral and how can I deliver it in an entertaining way too?
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think that type of show would mean more to you as a performer than, I'm just going to do Three Little Pigs again. You know what I mean? Like having a show that means something to you, whatever the topic is, will mean something to you, and hopefully that'll come through to the audience as well.
Exactly. And there's certain, there's the original shows that I've written have a real simple formula. There's a good guy, the protagonist. He's got and he's usually sort of smaller in stature, and then there's the bad guy who's either bigger or more powerful in some way. And, the little guy has to overcome the bad guy by using his wits. And that's just nearly every story that I've written. And it's a simple formula, and it's, typical Western, arc of drama. It's loads of fun.
Now, you at national festivals and regional festivals and everything, you give a talk about the business side of puppetry.
Yeah.
And could you tell us a little bit about the topics that you covered? I mean, we don't want to give away the whole thing right here.
I know, right? Come to the workshop.
Yeah.
No, I really, because Richard was so generous in teaching me what he knew and about puppetry and about what he was doing as a business person. I get really interested in talking about it, and every time I do, I learn more by sort of reassessing what I'm doing as a small business owner and what's working and what's not working, so I know what to teach. And a lot of my problems, like, going into the Small Business Administration and being convinced I could only make $36,000 a year, a lot of my problem has been open-mindedness, is opening up to the possibilities that are there. Because the moment I say, oh, well, that's impossible, I'm not even going to try it, or I'm just going to find too many barriers to cross the line. So that's the very first thing I talk about in my workshop is opening up to not only creative possibilities. Usually the people that take my workshops already have a pretty good handle on that there, but opening up to the monetary aspects, because I think sometimes with artists there can be a poverty mentality. It's like, oh, if you're going to be a puppeteer, if you're going to be an actor, you're going to be a starving artist, and I think that sort of it manifests itself by having that mindset. It's like, oh, and I mean, and if you want to do that, great, be poor and be an artist, but that's not been my experience. And when I went back to grad school, I was around a bunch of actors who had much bigger resumes than I ever had, and yet they were struggling to make ends meet. And I just kept my mouth shut. I was a little ashamed about how much I was making doing my art form, but I wonder how much it was that somebody opened up my mind early on that I could make a really good living at it, that helped me out.
Well, and one thing I've heard about, I'm taking your workshop later this year, but one thing I've heard about your workshop is that you're also very open with, your business. You know what I mean? You're saying, oh, this is how much I make. This is how I make it. Here's the breakdown and all that stuff. Is that, I don't know. I think sometimes in the art world, don't talk about how much you make.
That's exactly why I open up. I basically have a Quicken report that I run and shows every dime that I've made over the last 10 years, and I think it is very exposing. And I think one of the reasons I do it is that I'm really proud of how much the business makes, and so
right.
So that's I'll toot my own horn there a little bit, but I also think that you've got to let people know that it is possible to make that much money and not work particularly hard. I mean, not that I don't do plenty of work, I do, but I don't work 40 hours a week most weeks. If I work 20 hours a week, that's stretching it for me.
Right.
Those are 20 intense hours that I'm doing, and a lot of it is, sometimes it's commuting and sometimes there's other stuff going on, but that's a perfect amount of work for me because that's about my attention span in a week.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. The workshop that you're going to take in Minneapolis, I think that'll probably be the last time that I open up my books like this, because I think you can do it a few times and it gets the point across. But then I think it's, I think enough's enough.
So get to Minneapolis for the National Festival.
Yeah, to take a look at my books.
To
or
see
just
the
hack my computer.
final performance. Well, if a puppeteer is like thinking seriously about starting their own company, and I have actually seen a lot of younger puppeteers who are in their early 20s, and they want to get into doing libraries, and they want to do same nut tree jobs and things like that. What advice would you give about setting up the company or starting down that road?
Yeah, I think the most fortunate thing for us was we had Fairy Tale Town that paid us to develop new shows for them. If there's any way that you can find a client that is willing to, essentially book you for a bunch of shows, and you build a show for them, and then you get to keep the show, gosh, that's a great way to go, because you'll have test audiences and you'll be able to sort of flail around a little bit with the show and work it out in front of audiences before you actually get it in front of, someone that's never seen your work, and you're performing the show that you've never performed for an audience for the first time. I think that's really important, and get 3 or 4 shows, in the can as soon as possible, because once if a library books you in one summer, they're going to want you back the next summer, but they're going to want a different show. So if you've got 3 or 4 shows, you've got 3 or 4 years worth of work at that particular library. And if your work is good, they're going to want you back, because librarians and elementary school teachers and preschools and all the different venues that we perform at, these people are so overworked, and they don't want to spend any time looking for a new performer if you are working for them. So once you get your foot in the door, if you do a good job, you're going to come back over and over again. And of course, like the basics of make it super easy for your client, like show up on time, make any sort of email interaction with you, just try to anticipate them just to make it easy, because you could have a really good show, but you can make it difficult for your client in any way, shape, or form, and they don't want it to be difficult. They'll go with somebody else who's easier to work with.
Do you publicize your own shows? Like, do you approach libraries and stuff like that, or is it all now just pretty much people come to you?
There's just a great deal of laziness going on with me. Yeah, we're to the point where people are coming to us. Every once in a while, we'll have to show up at a library showcase or something like that, just to remind people that we're around. Or, there'll be a retirement of, we've been doing this for about 22 years, so somebody will retire, or there'll be a shift in management or something like that, and we'll have to put our foot back in the door. But we're just not doing hardly any publicity for our regular kid shows. They just seem to continue to roll forward. In
the past, though, did you do flyers or things like that, postcards?
Oh, absolutely.
Stuff? Yeah.
Absolutely. We did mailers, and for every 1,000 mailers we would send out, we would usually get 50 bookings, maybe 100 bookings out of that. That's sort of less frequent. We're doing emailing a little bit more when it comes to trying to fill in a particular slow month. Sometimes we'll send out an email blast to our current client base and offer a little bit of a discount to fill up a particular dead couple of weeks, just to keep people working. Yeah.
And does social media play a role in all this at all?
I have yet to figure out what social media has done for the company. I mean, we've had maybe 2 clients contact us through our Facebook page. And maybe I'm just not using it right. I don't know. But we try to keep it alive with posts, and we use it as a place to put up new puppets that we're building, or a new show that we're putting out, but not in an effort to get that show booked, but just in an effort to let people know what we're doing. But our website is the place where people seem to find us and find information out about us, at least new clients for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah. We find that we lose probably, maybe 2 to 5% of our clients every year. And so we only need to catch 2 to 5% new clients every year, which is nothing. That happens just by somebody doing a web search and booking us. But again, once they book us, we're there at least once a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think many creative individuals, puppeteers included, have the problem, especially in the beginning, of wondering how much to charge for their services.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on what you should charge when you're starting out?
Charge more than you think you're worth, because you probably think you're not worth very much. And if 10% of your clients aren't saying, "Oh, that's kind of expensive," then you know, like this happens every time. Like I'm going to a new client and maybe it's in an area that's kind of far away, and I think, all right, I'm going to charge them my FU price. I'm gonna, and just because I don't want to go all the way out there. And if they say yes so quickly, I know that I could have charged much more on that, right? So
right.
If there's not a little bit of a pause, if there's not a little bit of a hesitation, if there's not a little kickback, if some people can't afford you, that's great. If everyone can afford you, then you're not charging enough. So push it. So 5-10% of the people that are calling in, like new clients, be like, "Oh, that's too expensive for us," and that means that 90% are taking you at that price point, and that's good. Yeah. It's really, really hard to raise your prices once you've established what you're charging. The clients will accept it, or they'll accept it or they won't accept it. Most of them, if you're doing good work for them, will accept it. But for me, mentally, it was hard to go from $150 a performance back when I started to $350. And every time I raise it, I'm just like, oh, am I going to lose a client? Or like, it's difficult to do. So if you just start at a higher price point, and then you can always adjust down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you had an accountant. Did the accountant come on board pretty early on in your puppetry company, or were you doing all the books yourself?
She came on early. She doesn't do the books. She just does our taxes. And in fact, I just got a letter from her that she's retiring, and I swear I got it out of the mailbox and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "No!" Because she's been so great. She's been through 2 audits that we had to go through with the IRS. She represented us in those, and it was, she's just the best. And she's always had really good advice of like where, we keep our books really clean. We don't do any sort of cheating of the IRS, but every once in a while we'll fudge a little bit, or we'll do something that's likely to cause a red flag, which would put us at risk of an audit. And she said, well, I'm willing to argue this in front of an auditor, so let's go forward with this, which has been terrific. But she's not like a bookkeeper where she's coming in and doing the books.
Right. Okay.
That's me. And again, I just had no idea. In fact, I was in this argument with a lady on Facebook when I asked sort of like, I guess a basic bonehead accounting question, like, how do you track something like this? Because it was something about prepayment of clients. And she just sort of raged at me like, it's basic accounting. And I got really upset. And then because I'm insecure about running the business because I don't know a lot about it. I've just had to make it up as I've gone along. And I realized that that's where my insecurity was coming from. It's like, oh yeah, I don't know basic accounting. And this was really helpful. So I thanked her.
Let's see you puppeteer, lady.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Here, work this rod puppet. Now who's boss?
It's basic puppeteering.
It's basic puppeteering. I should have thought of that.
Well, I know you have done some television and film work in your career as well. Do you still audition or do television and film stuff?
No. I'm going to turn 50 this year. I don't, I think I'm good at what I do. And I want to continue to grow in that area, but I don't want to like start learning how to be, a marionettist. I don't want to learn how to start being a ventriloquist. I feel like I'm willing to continue to grow and learn in what I'm doing, but I also realize that I'm in midlife and it's not time to pick something up. And I think, the little bits and pieces that I've done with television and film, it's trained me on the monitor a little bit, but gosh, I'm just not a good monitor puppeteer, and I don't want to work hard to be one because I'm not that interested in doing it. I do want to be a really fantastic live performer for kids' audiences, and I am, but I want to continue to become better and better at that. And so that's where my work lies is, okay, how did I feel about that performance? Am I going too fast? One of my favorite things to do is see how long I could let an awkward silence ride. You get that first laugh from it, and then can you let it ride so the second laugh comes? Can you have that much faith in your audience and in yourself that that's going to happen? And when that second laugh comes because the awkwardness has been held so long, there's just something magical about that. And for me, that requires incredible courageousness to trust that your audience is going to be with you like that. So that's the kind of stuff that I want to work on. And when I'm doing stuff on television, I'm trying to crack the camera guys up because they're your only audience and they've seen it all. So it's, right. I don't know, kids' audiences are a lot easier, I think.
Yeah. Well, you have been a guest at the ONeill Puppetry Conference, and you mentioned the ONeill before. Have you been several times?
Yeah, I went first time as a participant. Second time, they brought me back. The first time, they started doing emerging artists, and we did some work there. And then they brought me in 2016 to be a guest artist, which was a huge honor. And so we did 30 minutes of Sweeney Todd with life-size puppets. And we've got a couple of producers that are shopping that show around right now. Got a couple of producers that are shopping our version of Man of La Mancha with life-size puppets around. And I have no idea how to monetize those kind of things, but the kids shows sort of fund my adult puppet habit. So I really hope one of those projects get to fly one of these days because they're beautiful productions. The puppets for Man of La Mancha were built by Kristen Phillips Gray. She's an incredible builder. And I don't know if you're familiar with Man of La Mancha, but essentially, sure. Cervantes gets thrown in prison, and to entertain the prisoners so they don't kill him while he's waiting for trial, he hands out costumes to the prisoners and involves them in the story of Don Quixote de la Mancha. And so we thought, God, wouldn't it be cool if he handed out like these big puppets to the prisoners and had them operate these? And it worked really well. The concept worked really well, and we've had a couple of productions of it. Now we're trying to get a professional production rolling at a regional theater. So fingers crossed.
Do you think the ONeill is important for puppeteers to attend?
Yes. It was life-shaping for me. When I was there in 2016, I was pinching myself that I got asked back. It was 20 years to the day that I got asked back from when I was an emerging artist there, and it showed me that I had a voice. The puppeteers that go there as part of the staff are incredibly supportive and just give so much of their talent and time. And everyone is creating, and there's just an electricity in the air. They say that a week at the ONeill is something like 3 weeks in the real world. Like you just get so much done in so little time, it was life-changing for me. So definitely go.
Yeah. Well, you served as vice president of Puppeteers of America, and in your opinion, what are the benefits of joining P of A?
I get my insurance through Puppeteers of America. It's a pretty good deal. That's certainly one of the benefits. There's also, the festivals that P of A puts on. There's always something to complain about at a festival because there's going to be some really crappy shows and there's going to be some terrific shows and there's going to be some awful workshops and there's going to be my workshop and there, so there's all sorts of different things. But what it really does is it pulls puppeteers together. And you get to see all sorts of different work, and you get to, probably learn some skills as well. And I think that's one of the primary things about Puppeteers of America. And then there's the journal, which, I thumb through from time to time, but I think it's the festivals for me that are really the primary hook for Puppeteers of America.
Well, as we're wrapping up here, is a question I like to ask. Who is a puppeteer that you enjoy watching?
Who's a puppeteer that I've got a few. I love watching Liz Joyce from Goat on a Boat. She's really fun to watch perform. Who else do I like? I forget. I don't know that guy's name. And I know I'm an awful puppeteer for not knowing this, but the guy who does, is it Tony Fiammo? With the Muppet character with the eyebrows that
Johnny Fiammo.
Bill
Beretta.
Bill Beretta.
Yeah.
Bill Beretta. Gosh, everything that I've heard about Bill is he'll sit with a puppet and he'll let the puppet teach him what it can do, and then he'll bring that character to life. And man, I tell you that for me is fantastic to watch. Whereas, I think some puppeteers are just talented and they just put a puppet on, they do it, and you can see that they're just going through the paces, whereas others are just doing some incredible character work, both with the movement of the puppet and with, the vocal intonations and the pacing of how the puppet is saying what it's saying. That's what's really fascinating to me. And then there's a guy I'm not a huge fan of marionettes, but there's a guy in the UK. His name is Stephen Mottram. Every time I've seen him perform, he does nonverbal shows with marionettes, and they're dark and brooding and brilliant. He brought us back to his studio in Oxford, and he did this little piece with a fish marionette that was just mesmerizing. 5 minutes of puppetry that I will remember for the rest of my life. Incredibly talented guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Art, if people would like to reach out to you or see what you're working on, stuff like that, where can they go online?
They can like our Facebook page, Puppet Art Theater Company. Search that. That'll come up with our Facebook page. Our website is puppetarts.com, puppetarts.com.
All right. Well, I'll have links to all that in the show notes. And Art, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here.
My thanks to Art Gruenberger for being on the show. I'll have links to the Puppet Art Theater Company in the show notes for this episode number 26, over at underthepuppet.com. This episode of Under the Puppet featured music by Dan Ring and was edited by Steven Staver. Under the Puppet is a production of Saturday Morning Media and is made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who've gone to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up a monthly pledge for as little as $1 a month. Patrons get new episodes before they are released, behind-the-scenes information, and exclusive bonus content. If you'd like to support this show and the other fun content from Saturday Morning Media, become a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up your monthly pledge today. You can also tell a friend about the show or leave the show a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2019 Saturday Morning Media Grant Pachoco executive producer. All rights reserved. www.SaturdayMorningMedia.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.